Well, something kind of important just happened for China, that is. China just passed the U.S. in retail sales by hitting 5.64 trillion versus the U.S.'s 5.53. This is a 7.5% increase. We've been hearing their economy's been only growing, 6.6% instead of 6.8. And we never know over there because they do fudge numbers and tend to overstate. But this sort of retail sales growth would suggest, that they're still doing pretty well. So China continues to be this paradox. Obviously, it is the up and coming country, like the U.S. was. We were the up and coming emerging country in the early 1900s and into the roaring 20s and became the greatest economy in the post-World War II time period, especially in the 1950s forward. But China also has severe problems that we did not have at the same time. China has 22% of homes empty. They overbuild. I've said this year after year after year for years. China's strategy is to push people into urban areas rapidly from rural areas where they have 3 times the income and GDP per capita, and to do that by continuing to build stuff, infrastructure and condos and stuff, but they're overbuilding, and they're overbuilding massively. They've got 30 to 50% excess capacity and a lot of things like aluminum and cement and steel and things like that. But 22% of condos in cities are empty. And I also saw an earlier study that took just a few big cities, probably like Shanghai and Beijing, and just measured the condos or homes that were hooked up to electricity and were using it, and that came out 27%. So how can that be a good thing? And how can China continue to overbuild so much? The other thing, it leads the world, the emerging world, in corporate debt. And corporate debt is the very debt that's most likely to default when things go bad and when you overbuild like China has and you have a lot of empty real estate. One of these days, people are going to realize that's not healthy, and Chinese are going to start panicking and selling their real estate, which is the most overvalued in the world. But what China basically does, their government debt doesn't look so extreme. It's their corporate debt, 164% of GDP. That it's 92% for the average, developed countries, and it's just a little over 100%, or right around that for the U.S. It's 108% for emerging markets on average. China leads everybody, and what the Chinese government basically does is implicitly guarantee debt that local communist governments and developers take on to build all this stuff for nobody. So they're guaranteeing this whole thing. And that's why people don't worry about it and don't worry about real estate falling. And again, it's not a problem with defaults either for China. It's going to be the biggest contraction of wealth in history because Chinese have 75% of their net worth in real estate. And it's the most overvalued. Hong Kong's 20 times and normal real estate's more like 10 times plus income. So overvalued real estate, overowned, a lot of it empty. This is going to end badly, and this corporate debt used to fund all this stuff is going to default. So China is this enigma. It has also peaked in demographics, which I've said many times over the last several years. Its workforce growth peaked in 2011 and has been declining since. And migration from rural areas into cities also peaked in 2014 and has been declining modestly. I mean, that's a whole reversal of everything China's banking on. So China does not have long-term demographic growth, but they do have continued urbanization growth. I'm just projecting that it'll take China close to a decade to work off all this excess capacity in housing and infrastructures and all this excess debt. And then they'll grow through urbanization, but not as fast as a lot of other emerging countries. And India will be the new China, is my projection. So again, China looks good today, and everybody, economists keep saying, yeah, they're the next big thing. But that's what they said about Japan They said in the late 80s that Japan was going to surpass the United States and become the number one country. And that they never even got close in that case. China's already surpassed it by some measures, GDP, PPP, purchasing power adjusted. But they have not passed us in U.S. dollars and are not close on that. But still, China is not going to continue to grow at 6, 7, 8%. And this downturn, when it happens, they may be the last to fall, but when it does, they will be hit the hardest from what I see.